This is wonderful. I kind of feel like this is going to be a two-part episode, and this may be
Sure.
the split point. So listeners, if you're hearing this, come back next time to hear Joshua's story. And thanks for listening to this episode. And yeah, okay. And now we'll just get right into your story. So here we go, part two. What's your queer journey been like? However you want to tell it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first off, thanks so much for giving me a space to do that. But, um, I mean, uh, I've really hid in my clinical work because that's has always just been in my academic and empirical work. It's just always been where I have found the most safety. I grew up in a pretty conservative and religious community from the time I was even in pre-K. I mean, I was in church school and or school in the basement of a local church, and through elementary, middle, and high school, I was at a private Christian school, and I just would say like it's just the stereotypical experience of being a queer person in that space. I mean, there was no conversation about fluidity. There was no conversation about healthy sex and education on that. And so, my worldview was just so small, so small. I mean, I think, and most of my school was less than 200 people. I mean, it was just really, really small. And then, so, again, I just have been pretty much inundating with how religion, particularly Christianity, saw being a queer person, and I I I just didn't have language for it. I think if I could, like, gosh, up to maybe my young adulthood years, did I really even kind of begin to understand what it meant to be gay? I mean, the language I had was it's unwanted same sex attraction. And so again, obviously, when it's unwanted, there was these implications or like connotations that like there it could be changed in some way. Like it was something you kind of had to like wrestle with or fight against. And that's what I spent most of my, you know, teenage years and young adult years doing. Um, I also was in the pursuits well, I was a college athlete. I played football in college, and obviously there's a whole, again, expectation of masculinity that's embedded in and competing at a collegiate level, especially something like football, and obviously like locker room culture and things like that. Anything that was seen as like feminine or AKA gay was just not acceptable. So even when I went off to college, and the school I went to was not a religious school; it was a public university. I was then forced right back into this really, really intense masculine environment. And so there just wasn't ever environmentally space for me to explore, to understand. And I would just say this, like, prior to my divorce and prior to uh, coming to terms with my sexuality, which was in my late 20s, I mean, I would genuinely have told you that I'm not gay. I'm not bisexual. I'm not queer. I'm not any of those things, because my worldview was centered around, like, again, this is a choice, and it's not something, or it's something that I should be controlling. So, again, that's my background, and everything around my community told me, to and like who my personhood was to be married, was to have kids, was to be in church, was to support others and serve others, and that's the only thing I pursued. Like I honestly just didn't even know there was another option for me. And I know that that sounds like so ignorant, but I mean, that's just was my experience. Like, I mean, I had experiences, with, uh, like friends and stuff growing up that, I mean, honestly could have been easily written off as just like, that's just what boys do. Like, it wasn't anything like explicit sex or anything like that. It was just, a bunch of, I, sheltered private school kids that just, were acting out sexually with each other, like, and so there wasn't ever like a relationship component to what I did, or there wasn't actually, again, any explicit sex. And so, for all it's worth, and, like my duty at that time was, to be a virgin when I got married, and I really, really, really stuck to that. Like, that was a narrative that kept me closeted for a long time. And now that I look back on it, I mean, I have to take some accountability to this. I mean, I was terrified. I think I hid behind that. I couldn't ever imagine my teammates, my coach, my my church community, or anybody like that understanding who I was, as a gay or queer person. And so, I fell into what was most, privileged for me, and being that I presented masculine, I was an athlete, um, and I could, and then I was married. All of those things like just didn't coincide for me to like ever take my queerness serious, because there just wasn't
Yeah.
space for it.
Wow, interesting. And before we get it, I want to ask about your marriage, but like it just seems like those kind of homoerotic like things that happen that are not explicitly sexual, but that you look back and they're kind of charged. I feel like those kind of things happen, and especially more in the more like repressed environments, or like where straightness is the only option, like religious communities, or even just like summer camp where there's no visible queerness, like just any kind of environment where
Hmm.
straight is the only option. Then these like things happen that where this is getting expressed in a way that kind of is acceptable or works and isn't explicit. Can you talk about like what that can look like either in your life or other things you've heard, whatever you want to share?
Well, I can share about what it looked like in my life, and it was just a lot of fear. I mean, it was constant anxiety and fear. I think I did my best to buffer those symptoms, but it just would manifest itself that way. I mean, it was just so much constant suppression. Um, I don't mean to deter the topic away from me, but like, I mean, I've worked with individuals, who will come. I remember this one particular client that came to me, and he unfortunately suffered from OCD, and, he was religious as well, and, uh, in session, like, he would never look at me in the eyes, like he just always was looking down. And after the first time I met with him, I was like, what's going on here? Like, is everything okay? And he was like, I can't look at you, because if I look at you, then I'm going to feel attracted. And then if I feel attracted, then I'm gay. And then if I'm gay, I'm going to hell. And and it was just this huge spiral and obsessive and compulsive thinking that he was just, I mean, he was miserable. He was miserable. And so, I don't, I'm using that as an example of like, that's kind of what it felt like internally. I'm just like, just constant suppression, constant suppression. So
Interesting.
that's what it felt like for me. I would say, within the scope of what it looks like in mixed orientation couples, there are a lot of men that echo coming from a conservative and a religious background, but there are some men that don't. You don't have to have that experience to go through this, but what I would say about that is, um, and this was what some of the research, or some of the data that came from my research was, when I was interviewing these counselors and I was talking about like, okay, how are these men understanding themselves? How are you working with them? How's the wife reacting? A lot of them would say, I, I was struck by the fact of how many men who had came to me had just been through conversion therapy, like 6 months
Huh.
before that, or they had seen another counselor who labeled their sexual expression as an addiction and put them in a 12-step group immediately. And, you know, any other thing besides, like, again, heteronormative straight sex was seen as like this massive deviation, which was startling to me, because obviously we know that conversion therapy does not work. It's not an effective tool, but it was like this modern day version of conversion therapy. It was like a rebrand for conversion therapy, where these couples have gone to pastors, or they've gone to other people in their community, and they've referred them to actual conversion therapy, or they label prematurely their gayness or queerness as an addiction. And it's,
Huh.
what's so unfortunate about that is you see the psychological toll that plays out for men in those situations, and it's really dire. I mean, the risk we pose here is just, unfortunately, just the uh, amount of suicidal thoughts and feelings and things that can come up for men in these situations.
Right. I mean, that makes so much sense, and it kind of makes my blood boil, because it's like a lot of people, they're finally seeking help and reaching out and exposing themselves, and then like getting stabbed. Like and then those things make it worse when you're finally ready to receive help from the universe, and it actually compounds the shame and makes you feel like you're broken and need to be fixed, instead of the other way around. I'm glad you mentioned those things. And also, like what you said earlier about like how this stuff shows up in those kind of environments, that makes a lot of sense to me, where it's like it's not even necessarily anything out of the ordinary or explicitly sexual. It's about how you feel in these situations. Like I remember like a locker room or a shower house used to cause me so much internal tension, and I like was deathly afraid of being naked in these spaces. I would always wrap the towel very tightly and like, put clothes on and off like carefully, and like not looking, avoiding, eye contact. And it's just like locker rooms exist. They have to exist. How else can you shower at summer camp other than like a communal shower? But like, so it wasn't the situation itself, it was my internal reaction to it that, looking back, was the clue. So
Hmm.
that's a really, really interesting.
Which is why advocacy is so important, which is why, um, again, education is so important, because you know, you have to have a space for it to be expressed. And I mean, there is just not a lot of openness in conservative and religious groups to see those things. So again, that can be a really detrimental little part of this.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so tell us about like meeting, however much you want to share about your marriage, like meeting your wife, and then tell us that journey leading up to
Um,
disclosure and everything.
yeah. Well, so I mean, we uh, we had known each other since we were young. I mean, we started grade school. Well, I mean, I guess you would technically call it middle school, together. And so, because we were in such a small community, our families and extended families were all intermingled. Um, and so we had known each other for a long time. As far as like the extent of our relationship, I think that this is really important to note. Like, I would say that I had a really satisfying marriage. Like I was very happy in that relationship. Um, which, again, led me to this work, because when I reached out, or when I looked at both ends of the spectrum, like kind of like this, heteronormative ideal, or like this gay affirmative ideal, the type of bond and connection we had wasn't really explained by either. Because again, in the at our normative camp, it was like, well, you should be straight, like, and that's the only way that this works. And you know, unintentionally, the game and informative agenda sort of swayed me into saying things like, you have to only be authentic, and there's no room for anything other than that. Which, again, I can understand the spirit behind that now, but at the time it was just very confusing for me. And so, again, I would say our relationship was good. I think it was emotionally deep. Um, I would have said that, during our marriage, we generally saw each other as companions and partners and best friends. We went through a lot of life together. Um, and again, and even through the divorce process, like, those things were still very true. Unfortunately, it was about 10 years into our relationship where uh, I had an experience with uh, another man, and uh, it was explicit. It was something I could not ignore. It wasn't something I sought after. It honestly just presented itself. Um, and at that point, I had a decision that I couldn't look away from it anymore. Like, I think my context previously was like, again, this is something that I could, like, pray through, or I could, like, conquer. But at the point that I had got to, with this other person sexually, like, it was just something I couldn't ignore anymore. Which at that point is, I had a full identity crisis. It was extremely difficult for me, and for her. But I it was confusing. Um, I didn't have a lot of places to turn. Luckily, I had a great individual therapist at this point who, um, was a gay man and clergy. I think in the Methodist, Lutheran, or I don't know, maybe it was even Catholic Church. I'm not exactly sure. But he was the safest person that I had available to me, and it was the first time that somebody from a religious perspective could speak to me about what I was actually feeling internally. Because, again, my understanding and identity was simply based on what the Bible told me.
Mm-hmm.
There was no biological or physical education that I ever experienced that was healthy. I mean, I recall, like, my ninth grade physical education or PE class, where our teacher brought all the ninth grade boys into, like a shared space. And you could tell, like, okay, this is about to be the sex talk, like, it's about to happen. And he pulls up this website, and it was this, like, chastity, or, like, um, virginity, like, uh, program that was for like teenage boys. And I'll never forget, it was the program was, every time you masturbate, you kill a kitten. And as ridiculous as that was, and obviously when he's showing this, I mean, it's a bunch of locker room boys, like, everybody's losing it. But from me, like, I mean, I was like, well, I don't want to do that, like, what, and so, again, that just kind of showcases, like, how small my world was. Um, and so, again, my counselor, Josh Noblet, was just so helpful to helping me kind of piece these things together. Um, so, again, at that point, we the experience with that guy had gone on, um, and I shared it and disclosed it, and we attempted to, um, or we eventually separated, and then we attempted to go to counseling and things like that. But we divorced really quickly. I think from the time that I had disclosed what had happened, we were divorced in 3 months.
Wow. Yeah. So you're in that first category we talked about earlier in the last episode. Yeah. And you had been married for about 10 years, you said?
Yeah, we were together for about 10 years altogether.
Together. Yeah. Wow. And like, yeah, how, I mean, what was navigating that like? And then on the other side of it too, like, what did you go through after that?
I mean, yeah, that was that was the most. I mean, I don't know how to go out to say this, but like, I felt like a 13-year-old in a 30-year-old body. Like I mean, there was just so many like pieces of my identity and my sexual development that just all came crashing down. And so at that point, when we had both agreed to divorce, it felt like a task for me to begin to understand that. Like, I mean, I I, I didn't know in the full spectrum of who I was and what I wanted, and so I set out to find that. And let me be really clear. Like, I mean, had to rebuild. Like, you know, I, and again, I'm not trying to be like a victim to this. Um, I'm not trying to not take responsibility at all, but like, I mean, I just didn't have anybody that I could reach out or reached out to me. I knew one gay person at that point, and so I mean, I was rebuilding from the bottom up. I mean, I had the safest thing that I could find was a gay men's Bible study group that was in Atlanta, um, and it was me wrestling with my faith and my religious text and how I understood that. And that was really a core piece to that initial stage. And then it was also just like making gay and queer and lesbian and bi and trans friends. Like I didn't know. I mean, oh my gosh, I can't tell you how much I got made fun of for like not knowing all the like drag race references at that point. Like, I just didn't know anything. I wasn't acculturated in that point. So, at that point I was just making friends and trying to rebuild community. I was also still in my PhD program, and so I really, uh, like dug into the books and like hid behind research so that I could try my best to understand who I was and what was going on.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow. Thank you for sharing so much of the story. And then maybe there's more, but when you said earlier that you like had a happy marriage, like it reminded me of this article that just came out in the New York Times a couple weeks ago that I'm guessing you saw it, but it was about gay identified men, specifically gay identified as opposed to bi, who are married to women. And it was an article about like how this works and why it works. And like there are many couples who do choose to stay together in that orientation. And like it's counterintuitive. And I think the question people ask is like, how can a gay man be married to a woman and be happy? And how could she be happy? Uh,
Mhm.
how would you answer that question? Like, how is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, Rabbi, I think that that's probably the biggest question that I attempted to answer in my research, because again, when I was inundating with both camps of like you got to be straight or you got to be gay, like that just didn't fit my experience. I mean, I think at that time I would have genuinely said like, no, I love my wife, um, and and so here I am having these internal experiences and identity shifting while also still being very much so identifying with who I was in this marriage, and it was just so confusing. And if I could, like, I think from my research, like that's a lot of what came from it was like counselors just felt so pressured to be pushed into these binaries, gay or straight, you know, monogamy, non-monogamy, and it was just one or the other. And the counselors that reported to have the most success, or that the couples seemed to have had the best experiences with, were the couples and the counselors that could understand the aspect of fluidity. And the beautiful thing that I would like to emphasize, and I don't think I got to emphasize this on the first part, was that the relationships between gay or bisexual men and straight women are beautiful. Whether it's intentionally agreed upon as a lavender marriage, or something like that, or it's you uncover something along the way. There's beauty in that, and there's types of love that transcend traditional and societally accepting terms, like again, like there's just such a wrestling with couples and therapists that, like, but they have to be gay. Like, how are they only want to have sex um with men, and like, but they still have sex with her and they report being happy about that. And but if they're bisexual, but like, then what do we do about this gay, like, there's just such
Right.
a confusion around that
Yeah.
you, you know they just they don't really go anywhere with it, and it just forces the couple to have to make these really, like, dire, like, decisions of, like, oh, we got to get a divorce, and that's just not true. And
Hmm.
there's a lot of couples that have differing sexualities that find their relationship to be very, very deep, um, to be very pleasurable, and to be very satisfying.
Yeah. Interesting. And like some of it to me, what's coming up for me is like how much of that is a semantic distinction that then gets like integrated into the relationship dynamics and how you feel versus like what's actually real and authentically there. Cause like, for me, semantically, it's like if you can love if like you could love a woman and be in a relationship with a woman, to me that's like you could call yourself bi, but many people don't look at it that way or don't know that, or just
Mm,
gay just feels right to them, even if they're in this loving relationship. And it brings up this idea of like, sexual attraction versus emotional or romantic connection. And many people boil down your sexuality to the sexual attraction.
mhm,
And like, oh, if you can be emotionally or romantically connected, that's like a separate thing. And so that's not my sexual identity, but I still am connected to and love my wife. Like, I don't know what my question is, but like, how do you think about like these definitions and these terms and how that can affect the actual experience?
yeah, so, like, I would be the first person to say that identity is so important. Like, you have to have an identity. I mean, that's just core to human psychology. Like, how we make meaning of things is so significant. But when the meaning that we assign to those labels, or to those concepts, or to the marriage, that are explicitly negative, hurtful, and harmful, well, I mean, why, why would you want to be in that relationship? You know, and the unfortunate part about that is, my couples will find such peace in that, in my therapy session, and then they go out into their community, and they go, "Oh, I can't do this. Nothing around me reinforces what we have here." And it's a real shame, because I can't tell you. Well, to just be explicit, I don't think I've ever worked with a couple who did not share a deep love, care, and affection for one another. I think that's
Mm,
often a misconception that a gay or bisexual man can't love a straight woman in a deep, romantic, sexual way. Like, I mean, I think that can genuinely happen. You know,
mm,
the spectrum of desire and fulfillment in that is a whole nother story, but that doesn't mean it's not true. And so, again, these couples and therapists really are on this hunt for truth around, like, well, it's, if you're gay, you're gay, but it's so much more complex than that.
can I press you on that for a second? Because
Absolutely.
it's so interesting and it's something I think about a lot. Where it's like when you said that gay or bi, I feel like doesn't conflict at all for a bi man to love his wife. But the question people would ask is like, how can a gay man love a woman? Right? Like, and I get it, I've seen it, but how would you answer that?
Well, my
What does it mean to be gay if you love a woman? I guess is another way of.
exactly, exactly. Um, I would answer that with how some of my clients answer it, and they say I'm gay plus one,
Ah,
and they leave room for what they're experiencing with their wife. Um, I mean, I don't know if your listeners would agree with this. I don't know if you would agree with this, but uh, you know, I don't think I would call that a dissonance. Like I think that there is a genuine part of them that experiences that love connection in that moment. How we define that um, can be so expansive, so expansive. And the thing is like, you know, I know we're fixated so much on like the mixed orientation aspect of this, but like in heterosexual couples or other traditional couples, they they go through waxing and waning of love, care, and affection over the course of their relationship too. It's just that this sex or the sexual identity or orientation piece seems to be so taboo and rich with all types of negative connotations that it forces couples to not be able to make meaning for themselves.
yeah. Yeah, beautiful. That the gay plus one thing is really important and interesting. I think it was in that New York Times article, and I heard it a lot at the How conference. And when
Mm.
people find that term, uh, it really like you can see the energy in that and the opening and expansion and like you know comfort with that label for some people, where it's just like what I think about my attractions, it fits in with gay. And this also happened. Like I also love my wife. Somehow that happened and it's real and it's valid. I
Hmm.
don't ever see myself with any other woman ever, but this thing happened and is real. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because you've written a book on this, I mean, I would be curious because I've written journal articles about this and talked about bisexuality a lot. Um, but I mean, how does that feel for somebody who identifies as bisexual? Does that feel like that takes away from bisexuality?
I think like a few years ago, my reaction would have been like, that's bi. Like gay plus one is bi. And like bi means the possibility or potential of attraction romantically or sexually to more than one gender. And so if you've loved one woman in your life and that's it, like it's under the bi umbrella. But then like in practice and in reality, in the few years since I've been actually working with clients and not just navigating my own stuff and talking on a podcast, I've met so many people who just that doesn't fit for them. Like bi just doesn't fit because even though maybe it technically falls under that umbrella definition, gay just feels right to them. And I can see even your like I can see even your energy as I say it. It's like, yeah, and who am I to say what you should identify as? And just gay plus one feels right. And so like to me it's actually semantic whether that falls under the bi umbrella or not. It's like and so I'm coming to understand how valid and actually quite common that identity might be, whatever the reasons it develops and whatever the reasons that identity feels more comfortable to people. Yeah, I'm leaning now more towards like you do you, honey, and like that's fair and valid. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I would agree because like we both know the understandings of the concept of bi erasure and
yeah,
how again the harm that can cause from pushing somebody to a binary position. And I have a colleague of mine. I think her research is important to mention. She talked about this in terms of mixed orientation couples, um, and her name is Susan Benek, uh, and she talked about these essentialist scripts, like you're essentially gay if you do this, or you're essentially can only love one person because you're monogamous, and how that those scripts can, I mean, unfortunately, like either or will really just kind of like impact negatively or sometimes ruin a connection between a couple. And in my research, I
yeah,
found that like these counselors were unintentionally doing that because they didn't understand that concept.
yeah.
So it is a real phenomenon.
Yeah. Well, and it also speaks to something I truly have believed for a while, which is like the labels and the scripts and the stories, like when we're struggling and confused and figuring things out, those things can be super helpful just to be like, oh, I'm not alone in this. This is a
Absolutely.
pathway for me. Great. There's other people who've gone down this road. But then there is a certain point where like the label can, or the label of the story can limit you. And actually just it, like figuring out what is without the label is so much more helpful than deciding what
Absolutely.
to call it. And
Yep.
it's, it's the sorting hat in Harry Potter. It's like, he had the Slytherin in him, but he was like, no, I'm a Gryffindor. And like, yeah, he is a Gryffindor. That's what he is. The
And
sorting
I
hat
would say,
listened.
yeah, for sure. And I would say like there is a fine line between what you're describing and maybe how some other people groups in groups would understand that, because as long as the message is not reinforcing things that this is something that needs to be controlled or tampered or reduced or suppressed, go for it. But there's so many communities out there that would do that, and even in very uh, queer positive, gay positive, or affirming spaces. It's like uh, such a misrepresentation of like, well, you got to be only this, no ands, if, or buts, and that just can be harmful because, again, you know, for the husbands and men that I've worked with, their life looks nothing like that. So you can spend hours and hours and hours trying to help them like morph an identity into this box and label that just really does not encompass their experience.
Yeah.
And by that point, they're exhausted, you're exhausted, and they don't want to come back for therapy.
Right. Right. Interesting. Okay, I want to ask you a couple quick things before we end that we've talked about
Sure.
before, and I think are fascinating, and I want to get to. But the one I really want to make sure we get to is this support group you run for women who are married to queer men. Tell us about that. We need more of that. I can already tell before hearing about it, but tell us what that's like and how you decided to do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I would say um, at its point of conception, like um, honestly, clinically, I had so many men who had resources. The husbands were supported. I was sending them to support groups, online chats, therapists, all of those things. And so there was this like, you know, really intense dichotomy between the husband and the wife's, recovery and treatment process, because the husband was well on his way to understanding and being supported and having people that can just pat him on the back and say it's going to be okay. And then you had the woman or the wife who just became isolated, and she would just shrivel as a person, and she would just uh, be just so isolated from any kind of group that uh, I mean, I even had hard times like finding like reliable individual counselors to send them to, because I was
Mm,
so protective about them not falling into a therapist who like emphasized these essentialist scripts or like binaries that we were working so hard to not fall a trap to. Um, Not to say that you can at some point go to those extremes and look, but I wanted space for that therapeutically to be housed, and there just was not a ton of that. And I mean, even till this day, I mean, like there are some online support groups. I believe how I think there's a group called Mom,
yeah.
and or more.
More, I think it's more and more. And I've interviewed the creator of that group on this
Oh,
podcast.
okay, great. Yeah, so those are all, and I think maybe there's some.
Gamma is Gamma
Yeah,
include women? No, maybe not.
no, the gamma's for men, but there's
Yeah,
it's like Pathway, or I'm not sure. Maybe
yeah,
we can figure
something
that
like
out.
that. I'll put it in the show notes.
Perfect, perfect. So those groups are things that are accessible, but a lot of the women that I worked with, they were just like, Josh, there's nothing local. I
Yeah,
need to be in a room, in a space where I can see other women go through this experience and feel like I'm not alone. And I mean, I can't tell you how much I put that off. Like I, I sought counsel on it. I sought consultation. I sought other therapists. Like, should I do this group? Like, and this went on for like 2 years. I was like, is this something that should be done? I mean, I don't know if this is something that's, I should lead, or, obviously I've been in this circumstance and situation. Like, I don't know how they're going to respond with a man leading the group, and then also me having the experience. And I mean, countless therapists told me, like, don't do it. Just don't do it. It's not, it's not worth it. And I'll have to attribute to one of the clients that I worked with. She constantly insisted. There was maybe 2 clients that did. They were on me about it all the time. And so I really attribute it to them. They really encouraged me to create the group. And so we meet once a month. The group, again, consists of women who are either currently in relationships with gay or bisexual men, and or who have been divorced from gay and bisexual men. And so you have a lot of people in the group that are on different continuums of their experience in it, but all of it is so. First off, I just would say it's so tender. Like, it's just such a beautiful space where you can see people in the group for the first time, just like feel like, oh, I'm not alone, and I'm not crazy for feeling or going through this, and oh my God, I love my husband, but like, what the hell's going on here? I don't understand, and for them to just say that, and somebody else go, I get it. It's a really beautiful thing. But there's just so many overlaps between, regardless of where you're at in that process. But again, it really just was birthed out of like just need and necessity.
Cool. That's amazing. Like, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, this idea of like, sometimes on these message boards, and some of these groups that are virtual, the people it's attracting are the people who are really, really upset and going through it. And so a lot of what you then read when you first encounter it, or even on like a Reddit thread, is
Mm-hmm.
really negative and harsh and people, just upset. And so then it perpetuates this feeling that like there's no good answer to this and there's no solution and it's terrible. And that's not true. Like there's so much beauty in that experience, whether the couple stays together or not. There can be growth and authenticity. And so to have an in-person group is amazing. I've talked to Candace, who created More and More,
Mm.
about that, and that's why she created it, was because when she went through that, she went online and there was nothing but negativity and negative stories, and she figured it out and navigated it, and they have this like really strong marriage that stayed together. And that's out there too, and the support for that is really helpful, to just know you're not, just as it is for the guys, like to know that this experience is common and you're not going through it alone, and to have that support. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to echo the necessity for this is to say that because of the emotional and relational, and heck, even the community intensity that can come from these situations, because my gosh, these things can become public really, really quickly. There is a reality where the isolation that comes from when uh, your spouse is sleeping with somebody of the same sex. There's sometimes where I'm working with people that are public figures, and
Mm,
they're having to hide that because it will terrorize their family. They hold high positions in companies, or you know uh, politicians, clergy, pastors, all those kind of things.
yeah.
um, and so again, the stress that can come from that, um, can just be so divisive that if there's just a moment where somebody can just kind of catch their breath and realize like their whole world is like not going to fall apart because of this, it just
Yeah.
goes a long way. And so counselors can't just hold that themselves. Like they have to have community resources. They have to have other educated practitioners who understand what's going on, and to your point, like a space that is actually, being curated and led, because like you mentioned, I mean, there's the negativity that can come from that, even within the group. It can it can get
Right.
intense really, really quickly.
Right. I'd imagine, like, yeah, having a guide who knows a lot about this experience would be very useful, to just kind of stop some of those negative thought loops that are not really true, but based on stigma and stereotypes. So it's amazing that you're doing that. We will put some links to your work and how to people can contact you in the show notes if you're interested in
Sure.
joining that group. And I may steal your idea and start a group like that if you don't mind, because
Go for
there's
it.
we got to have more of this. There's more, it's amazing you're doing a group, but there's so many more people out there who could use it. So stay tuned. I may offer a similar group.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think you should.
Okay, we got to end in a few minutes because I have a client coming up. But can I ask you two real quick things
Go for it.
that are left over?
Yeah, go
Okay,
for it.
maybe this will be bonus footage. But when we talked like a month ago, you brought up this idea that is really common in people's minds. That's like, you know, when queer men or anyone knows something about themselves, it's this idea of like, once you get married, that will solve everything. That'll, like, marriage will fix it. Can you speak to that? It's just so common.
Yeah. Well, and I want to be really sensitive to the fact that, like, there are bisexual men that marry women, and these issues really never like surface. But
Mm, mm. So
unfortunately,
it might, I mean, fix maybe isn't the word, but it can actually, like, I guess if you're monogamous, right? Like, then you don't have to deal with any of these other things if you marry a woman, sort of.
it depends. It depends. I mean, I
Mm,
guess what I would say is that most of the couples that I'm working with are not coming from a informed place around identity. Like, they entered into the marriage with the expectation that they were both straight and they were both monogamous. And so, again, if you uphold those ideals, those traditional values, which are good, oftentimes those can just be replicated most commonly in very conservative spaces. And so,
mm,
um, somebody who deviates from that, though, yeah, I mean, we've done research on this and we've looked at it. Like, men will get married to gay or bisexual married, or men will get married to women because uh, they want to hide their identity. Um, they want a family. They marry for love, companionship, a misunderstanding of their sexuality. I mean, the motivators are expansive of why that happens. And there's been a lot of there's been a lot of clinicians and researchers that have tried to, like, operationalize or theorize, like, why that phenomenon happens. You know, but I'll say this as somebody who is a who has extensively looked at the research on this. The motivators behind why that happens is just, unfortunately, when it comes down to it, just, I mean, it's good, but it's also the reason why everybody else gets married. Like,
mm.
some people want to have companionship for the rest of their life. Some people want to have love. Some people are insecure about certain parts of themselves, and find reprieve in this other person that they can share intimately with.
Huh.
Again, so, like, who am I as a counselor to discredit that? And if that's what led you to this point, we have to take that as true and authentic, um, and not as something that's a lie. Because, again, like, for the wives, they just feel so deceived. They feel stupid. Um, they feel like they've been bombarded, and they just uh, feel like how could I not know this piece of information about the person that I know most deeply. And that's what I'm spending a lot of time with. It's like, okay, where's that belief coming from? Like, is that from a heteronormative or a gay affirming place? Because we have to understand that your relationship doesn't exist in that binary. Like, you found love and care and affection in a place that is true to you. And I would say this, that the people in these situations, or the couples that do the best, can reconcile the fact that they both care and love somebody who is not who they thought they were. And those people or those couples are the ones that typically have the most success in this situation. And also too, I would say for my own self, like, when I get most bombarded or stressed or overwhelmed by understanding, you know, that experience in my life, it's because there's a little bit of trauma that kind of creeps up for me, where it's like, you know, I can't see the good in any of the relationship that I had. It's like, how could you have done that? You were gay the whole time. You were lying the whole time. And I have to really, like, take accountability for those thoughts, because that's just not true.
Yeah.
Prior to me going through that experience, or I would say, for wives who have had the experience of figuring out their identity, like, this piece and meaning that you're applying to the relationship was not there prior. It's there present because you're traumatized by it all. And so you really have to be able to get through the hump of that comes along with that negative uh, attribution to you in the relationship. So
Mm.
whereas it's important to understand, like, yeah, okay, this is why uh, gay or bi married, or gay or bisexual men marry, straight women. I think ultimately is just the beginning step. Like, there is just so much abundance of love that has been experienced, that kind of gets overlooked by just simply asking that question.
Yeah. Wow, fascinating. I'm glad I asked you that. I could go deeper into that because that was a really interesting answer. But like the thing that really resonated for me is like thinking of it as marriage is going to fix this, maybe a not helpful way to think about it, because like it implies there's something to be fixed that's wrong or broken. But there are lots of reasons to get married. And you can do it for whatever reason you want. It's a social construct. It's like, and so like to do it for companionship, or like the reasons that a gay or bi man might do it to address something are not necessarily so categorically different from the reasons anyone chooses to get married, to address something or to have a certain type of life. That's really interesting. Okay, last thing, and then we got to go. I just have to ask you this. You said, when gay or bi men sort of get advice of what to do, there's often two camps. There's this camp of like, just be gay and go live your life and get out of this marriage. And then there's the camp of like, you should stay married and stick it out and tuck those feelings in and make it work. And you said neither of those is helpful. So like, why are neither of those helpful? And like, what is the advice you might give instead?
Uh, well, so I would say that in the short term, one of those answers feels really, really true and feels really, really like the only way to go. But I can propose that you just can't go back in the closet after that experience. And so many men and women in these instances will choose the aspect of foreclosure. They'll An affair will happen. They're on the brink of understanding certain parts of who they are, and one of them drops a bomb on the relationship to just siphon everything up. And out of preservation, they just foreclose again. Hey, we're not going to have this conversation. Um, it's just it's not healthy to do, and we have to go back and live our life. And again, the reason why that's not helpful is because um, it just doesn't last very long. Like, you can't suppress. And I would just say that, unfortunately, both the men and the women in these situations, unfortunately, show signs of mental health conditions like anxiety and depression at that point. And so, you know Those camps are not recommended because, one, it's not my place as a couples counselor to determine that for the couple. Ultimately, it's my job as a couples counselor to be informed about sexuality and to understand that if it's possible, then there is going to have to be a restructuring of a relationship. And I use this example with my the couples that I work with, because I there has to be some form of acceptance that, like, if you are going to decide to move forward, whether you stay together or you don't, your relationship is not going to look the same. It's just not. And
Mm.
again, they spend so much time trying to put where they're at back into one of those boxes or those camps. And again, I use this metaphor of, like, it's kind of a terminal condition, and I know that's so negative to say, but, like, it's the only really true way that I can get the couple to accept that, like, there's not a way to bargain and change and fix what's been lost. That's been lost, and you have to move forward. And the way that you move forward, again, whether you stay together or you don't, you have to navigate the relationship boundaries. Some couples
Mm.
will include opening their relationship, which is a positive and healthy way. Some couples will, give certain permissions, and the spouses will accommodate the gayness or the biness or the queerness in the relationship. But that has to be on the forefront of what goes on, because the husband is is just struggling and trying to now go back in the closet is just it's just too difficult. You're not going to be able to do it.
Mm.
So you have
Yeah.
to be flexible enough to open up your mind to say, like, oh, okay, we can't go back, so what's our next option? And the next option, again,
Yeah.
is you have to talk about what's going to be permissible in the relationship, because most of the time, uh, especially for gay men, uh, there's an unlikely nature of them only ever being satisfied with only having sex with their wife again. And I know that seems very prescriptive, but I want to just embody that, like, it's just rare for a man to have sex with a woman, then go and have sex with a man, and then come back to having sex with a woman, which again is a very true sense of bisexuality. It's much more common in women. It's not impossible, it's just not as common. And and so again, those desires, those attractions, and those forms of expressions are still going to be present. And even if we do really truly consider this as a man who is experiencing bisexuality, if you put your relationship back in a heteronormative environment, you reinforce things like bi erasure. And this is a common experience
Right.
for bisexual individuals who, are partnered with an opposite sex partner. They feel like their queerness or their same sex um, uh, parts are, uh, again, uh, gets forgotten or overlooked. And again, it's the same way that happens for men in mixed orientation relationships.
Yeah, wow, interesting. I wish we had another hour to go into that because it's fascinating, and it is like it's important to know. It's like, yeah, there may be some bi men probably who then can be comfortable with monogamy, but they're not going back into the closet. They're expressing their sexuality within the marriage in some way. But it's also really important for people to hear that, like, yeah, if it's a gay identified man and even like many bi identified men, like negotiating the boundaries and exploring some form of non-monogamy is going to be pretty common. And at least having that conversation and figuring it out and seeing where you both are is going to be necessary. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's just what often happens and is something people have to navigate.
Yeah, and if I
um,
could just paint a
yeah.
context for your listeners, that's months, years, some of the times of processing, and, like, I just would say, if, like, you have listeners that are at the beginning stages of this, like, we got to deal with the panic that you're going through. We got to get you to a calm, collected place and get you supported. Because again, most of my work is spending time in that, where, like,
Mm.
again, we just don't rattle the cage too much, and people leave and hurt feelings and, say the most unfathomable things to each other.
Yeah.
Like if you're at that point, like hold on, like navigating relationship boundaries is something that happens professionally way down the line, and don't be pressured to figure all those things out by yourself. Go seek a
Yeah.
professional to do that.
That's important to hear. And it's important for the guys too. It's like, they're out, they want to go explore now. And it's like, okay, we get it. That may be true and it may be what, is coming down the road, but like navigating it during that time of great tension and change and confusion is probably not the best thing. Navigate that period and then you can explore potential non-monogamy.
Which
Cool.
some guys can, some guys can't, but
Right.
and again, that's just some couples that don't have the ability to navigate that. They struggle, and it's really stressful for them. So anyways,
makes sense. Well, we could go on and on, but I have a client, so thank you so much for being here, Dr. Joshua Gebhardt. This was really fascinating. There's just so many people going through this experience in various forms, and thank you for your work, the dissertation, and your continued work. It's really necessary, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks again for letting me be here on the podcast and share my experience and my work. I really appreciate that.
Two Bi Guys by One Bi Guy is produced and edited by me, Robert Brooks Cohen, and it was created by me and Alex Boyd. Our new logo art is by Caitlin Weinman. Our music is by Ross Mincer. To help support this podcast, visit patreon.com/Robert Brooks Cohen. You'll get full video episodes, early access, and bonus content. Visit robertbrookscohen.com to learn more about my coaching, my book, and my stand-up comedy. And thanks for listening to Two Bi Guys by One Bi Guy.